the silent watchers. Across decades of silence and secrecy, our machines of war have brushed against the unknown. These are the quiet moments when that meeting left a mark, nights when the world's most dangerous weapons fell under a stranger light. We begin in the desert where the first atomic fires were born. In the summer heat of 1945, in a place called Trinity, human beings split the atom and changed the nature of warfare forever. The flash came at 5:29 in the morning, turning night into something brighter than noon, casting shadows that burned themselves into the sand. Those who witnessed it spoke of colours they had never seen before, of heat that seemed to come from everywhere at once, of a silence that followed the thunder as if the world itself had paused to consider what had just occurred. And according to some accounts, they were not alone in witnessing it. In the months and years that followed that first detonation, reports began to surface. Strange lights over the desert, objects moving in ways that defied the physics understood at the time. Military personnel stationed at Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, would sometimes see them during the long desert nights. Luminous shapes that hovered or darted with impossible speed, showing no regard for the restricted airspace or the sensitivity of what lay below. These were not the flying saucers of popular imagination yet. That language would come later. In 1945 and 1946 they were simply anomalies, oddities that appeared in classified reports with dry, cautious language. Unidentified objects, unusual aerial phenomena. The military documented them but did not publicize them. There was a war to win, and then a peace to secure, and the atomic monopoly to maintain, but the objects kept appearing. Chapter 1. Cold War Beginnings. The desert around Los Alamos holds its heat long after the sun goes down. In the stillness of those post-war nights, when the first generation of nuclear scientists worked under sodium lights and armed guards, there were moments when the sky seemed to answer the work being done below. Glowing orbs that tracked along canyon walls, discs that reflected moonlight in ways that suggested metal, solidity, purpose. The summer of 1947 brought the incident that would define the public's relationship with the unexplained for generations to come. Near Roswell, New Mexico, something fell from the sky. A rancher found debris scattered across his property. Strange metallic fragments, light as balsa wood but impossible to bend or burn. The initial military press release called it a flying disc, a statement quickly retracted in favour of a weather balloon explanation. The story should have ended there, lost to history like countless other wartime oddities, but it didn't end. It metastasized into legend, yes, but underneath the mythology, certain facts remain consistent across decades of testimony. Military personnel had retrieved something. The debris had unusual properties, and in the weeks surrounding the incident, multiple witnesses reported seeing structured objects in the skies over New Mexico, moving with purpose, often near or over facilities related to atomic research and testing. What draws particular interest, looking back across the decades with the benefit of declassified documents and aging witnesses finally free to speak, is not any single incident, but the pattern, the concentration of sightings. Between 1947 and 1952, the years when America's nuclear stockpile grew from a handful of weapons to hundreds, when testing moved from the New Mexico desert to the Nevada test site, and to the Pacific atolls, reports of unexplained aerial phenomena clustered around these locations with statistical significance that would later trouble military analysts. Project Sign, the Air Force's first official investigation into these sightings, began in 1948. Its classified Estimate of the Situation report allegedly concluded that the objects were interplanetary in origin, a finding so controversial that it was rejected by military leadership, and the report itself was ordered destroyed. Only one copy, according to later testimony, survived. Whether that conclusion was warranted by the evidence or represented overreach by enthusiastic investigators remains debated. But the fact that experienced military intelligence officers were willing to put such a statement in writing suggests the quality and quantity of reports they were receiving. By 1952, Project Blue Book had taken over the investigation. The cases that came across their desks painted a picture of something observing America's nuclear infrastructure with methodical attention. Out in Washington state, at the Hanford site where plutonium was being produced for the atomic weapons program, radar operators tracked objects moving at speeds no aircraft of the era could match. Down in Tennessee, at Oak Ridge, another facility critical to the nuclear program, the same thing was happening, and the pattern wasn't confined to production sites alone. Storage facilities reported them, test ranges saw them, and later, when the missile silos were built, the objects would appear there too. The objects, whatever they were, seemed interested in humanity's newest and most terrible invention. The Cold War transformed the nature of nuclear threat. What had been bombs delivered by aircraft became missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles that could cross oceans and continents in minutes. These weapons sat in silos scattered across the American heartland, always ready, always waiting. The men who guarded them lived with a particular kind of tension, the knowledge that their vigilance stood between civilization and annihilation, that any failure of protocol or technology could have consequences beyond imagination. In that context, the events at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in March of 1967 take on a special significance. Chapter 2: Malmstrom Air Force Base. The night the missiles went silent, March 16th, 1967. The northern plains of Montana lay under late winter snow. At Malmstrom Air Force Base, 20 Minuteman I intercontinental ballistic missiles sat in their silos, each one a thread in the delicate balance of mutually assured destruction that kept the Cold War from going hot. In the underground launch control facility at Echo Flight, 2 officers monitored the status boards that told them, moment by moment, that their missiles were ready. The night was routine until it wasn't. According to the testimony of Captain Robert Salas, who was on duty that night as Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander, security personnel began reporting strange lights in the sky above the facility. Red-orange glowing objects moving in ways that conventional aircraft didn't move. Hovering. Darting. The reports came in over secure communications lines, the voices of trained security personnel trying to describe something they had no framework for understanding. Captain Salas ordered the guards to maintain their positions and to continue monitoring the objects. He reported the situation to his commander, and then, in rapid succession, the missiles began to go offline. Not all at once, but in a cascade. One missile, then another, then another. On the status board, green lights that indicated ready status winked to red. Malfunction. System failure. The technical term was no-go, meaning the missile could not be launched. Within seconds, all 10 missiles at Echo Flight had dropped offline. 10 nuclear-tipped ICBMs, billions of dollars of Cold War deterrent rendered inoperable. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. As the security personnel watched the lights above, the missiles below lost power. Salas's commander, Lieutenant Fred Mewald, who had initially been skeptical of the UFO reports, could only stare at the status board in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The Minuteman system had redundancy built upon redundancy. For all 10 missiles to fail simultaneously suggested a cause that affected them all at once, and there was no known terrestrial cause that could do that without leaving obvious evidence of sabotage or attack. The objects in the sky moved away. The lights faded, and slowly, over the course of the next day, maintenance crews were able to bring the missiles back online. The technical reports documented the failures but could not explain them. Various theories were proposed: electrical surges, environmental factors, computer glitches, but none of them could account for the simultaneity, the specificity, or the timing. A week later, at Oscar Flight, another launch control facility at Malmstrom, it happened again. March 24th, 1967. Captain Eric Carlson and First Lieutenant Walt Figel were on duty at Oscar Flight when the same cascade failure occurred. Again, security personnel reported objects in the sky. Again, the missiles dropped offline in rapid succession. Again, maintenance crews found no clear cause for the malfunctions. The official reports documented equipment failures, but avoided drawing connections to the aerial phenomena. The Air Force conducted an investigation, but the findings, if they reached any definitive conclusions, remained classified. Decades later, when Captain Salas and other witnesses came forward publicly, they would describe a pattern of official denial and discouraged discussion. They had been told, according to their accounts, that nothing had happened, that they had not seen what they knew they had seen, that speculation about the cause of the missile failures was not conducive to good order and discipline. But in the quiet of their own thoughts, in the conversations they had with each other away from official channels, they knew what they believed they had witnessed. Something had demonstrated an interest in America's nuclear missiles, and more troubling, something had demonstrated an ability to render those missiles inoperable. The implications were profound. If the incidents were genuine, if objects of unknown origin had indeed appeared over the missile fields and coincided with systemic failures, then the entire strategic doctrine of nuclear deterrence rested on a foundation that could be undermined by forces outside human control. The balance of terror that kept the peace depended on the certainty that nuclear weapons would function when needed. If that certainty could be called into question, what then? These questions were not apparently pursued in any official capacity that has been declassified. The missile failures were treated as technical anomalies. The UFO sightings, when mentioned at all in official documents, were presented as separate, unrelated incidents. The pattern was acknowledged by individual witnesses but not by the institution, and yet the reports kept coming. Chapter 3. Minute Air Force Base, the B-52 Encounter, October 24th, 1968. A little over a year after the Malmstrom incidents, another Air Force base in the Northern Plains became the site of one of the most thoroughly documented UFO encounters in military history. Minot Air Force Base sat in the flatlands of North Dakota, home to rows of Minuteman III missiles buried beneath the prairie and a wing of B-52 Stratofortresses, those massive strategic bombers that formed another part of America's nuclear defense. Always ready, always watching. That night, a B-52 was on a routine training mission, flying a pattern over the missile fields. 6 men worked aboard in the quiet hum of instruments and engines. A pilot and co-pilot managing the controls, a radar navigator and navigator tracking their course through the darkness, an electronic warfare officer monitoring for signals, and a gunner watching the night beyond the aircraft's skin. Professional airmen, experienced, accustomed to the routines of Cold War vigilance. The first indication that something unusual was happening came from the ground. Radar operators at Minot's base tower picked up an object moving on a course that would intersect with this B-52. They radioed the bomber. The crew acknowledged and began looking. At first, they saw nothing. The prairie night was dark, the stars bright and cold above them. Then the electronic warfare officer, whose instruments monitored for radar signals from hostile sources, detected something. A signal, but not like any radar signature in his database. He reported it to the pilot. The radar navigator, watching his scope, saw the object too, a return that moved with purpose, closing on their position. The pilot looked out and saw it then, a structured object maintaining a precise distance off their wing. According to the later report, it appeared as a bright light with a solid shape behind it, keeping pace with the bomber as they flew at their cruising speed. The object moved with them for several minutes, matching their course and altitude with an ease that suggested technology far more advanced than anything in the American or Soviet inventory. Below them, at the Minuteman launch facilities scattered across the prairie, security personnel reported seeing the same object or similar objects, glowing shapes in the sky, moving over the silos. The reports came in from multiple sites, multiple witnesses, all describing objects that maneuvered in ways that conventional aircraft could not. The B-52 crew maintained their professional composure. They documented what they were seeing, kept their voices level on the radio communications. The object paced them for what the crew later estimated to be 9 minutes, though in the stress of the encounter, time becomes difficult to judge with precision. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the object accelerated away, moving at a speed the radar operators estimated to be in excess of 3,000 miles per hour, far beyond the capability of any known aircraft of the era. The bomber returned to base. A thorough investigation was conducted by both Air Force intelligence and, reportedly, by Project Blue Book, though the full details of that investigation remain partly classified. The incident was documented in reports that noted multiple independent witnesses, both airborne and ground-based, both visual and radar confirmation, and the impossibility of reconciling what was observed with any conventional explanation. What makes the Minot incident particularly compelling to researchers is the quality of documentation. This wasn't a single witness seeing something ambiguous. It was a trained bomber crew, radar operators, security personnel at multiple locations, all reporting consistent observations. The Air Force's official conclusion that the object was likely a plasma phenomenon or possibly an optical illusion struck many of the witnesses as inadequate to explain what they had experienced. Plasma, they noted, doesn't maintain formation with aircraft. Optical illusions don't register on multiple independent radar systems. The incident report from that night notes that the object appeared particularly interested in the missile silos, hovering over them before moving to intercept the B-52. If the reports are accurate, and there's little reason to doubt the credibility of the witnesses, then something had again demonstrated an interest in America's nuclear weapons, and again had done so in a manner that suggested capability far beyond known human technology. In the years since, other aircrews from Minot have come forward with similar accounts, describing encounters with objects over the missile fields during training flights or alert duty. The consistency of the reports, objects that hover, accelerate impossibly, show interest in nuclear weapons facilities, creates a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as misidentification or hoax. The question that lingers, the question that has no comfortable answer, is what those objects were doing. Observing, testing, warning. The objects never attacked, never caused direct harm. Their interests seemed to be in the weapons themselves, in the infrastructure of nuclear deterrence. They appeared, they observed, they demonstrated capabilities that suggested complete aerial supremacy, and then they departed. And in the silence they left behind, the men who guarded the missiles were left to wonder what, exactly, they were guarding them from. Chapter 4. USS Roosevelt and the Atlantic Encounters. The ocean has always held mysteries. Sailors know this in their bones, know that the sea can reveal things that have no place in the official record, things that get talked about in quiet voices during night watches but rarely make it into formal reports. In 2015, crew members of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, began encountering objects during training exercises off the east coast of the United States. The encounters continued for months. Navy pilots, flying FA-18, Super Hornets equipped with some of the most advanced sensor technology in the world, began reporting objects that appeared on their radar, on their infrared tracking systems, and sometimes visually through their cockpit windows. The objects moved in ways that violated the understood physics of flight. They would accelerate from a standing hover to supersonic speeds in seconds. They would maintain station against hurricane-force winds. They would appear at 80,000 feet, then drop to sea level in moments, with no visible means of propulsion. The pilots called them the fleet, because there were multiple objects and they seemed to operate in coordination. According to later testimony, these objects appeared nearly every day for a period spanning months. They showed up on training ranges, interfered with test exercises, and created a safety hazard for pilots who were trying to operate in what should have been controlled airspace. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, an FA-18 pilot who flew with the Roosevelt Strike Group, would later describe the encounters in testimony to Congress and in media interviews. He spoke of objects that defied explanation, that outperformed the best aircraft in the American arsenal by orders of magnitude. He spoke of the frustration among pilots who were reporting these incidents up the chain of command and receiving no clear guidance on what they were dealing with or how to respond. The infrared footage from these encounters, some of which was later released to the public, shows objects that move with characteristics no known aircraft possesses. One video, taken by a targeting pod on an FA-18, shows an object rotating as it flies, maintaining speed and altitude despite presenting its profile broadside to the airflow, an orientation that would destroy any conventional aircraft. Another video shows an object moving low over the ocean surface at high speed with no visible wings, no exhaust plume, no indication of how it generates lift or thrust. What made these encounters particularly noteworthy was their persistence and their location. The Roosevelt Strike Group was conducting operations off the East Coast, within what is arguably the most monitored and controlled airspace in the world. If these were foreign drones or aircraft, they represented a staggering failure of American air defense. If they were something else, the implications were even more troubling. And there was another factor, one that some researchers have noted but which remains difficult to verify without access to classified operational information. The Roosevelt Strike Group was, at various times during these encounters, operating in proximity to areas used for submarine operations, including ballistic missile submarines, the Navy's contribution to the nuclear triad. Whether the objects showed specific interest in the submarines or their associated support facilities is not publicly confirmed, but the possibility fits the pattern established at the Air Force bases decades earlier. The Navy pilots who encountered these objects were some of the best trained observers in the military. Their aircraft were equipped with sensors specifically designed to track and identify aerial targets. The radar systems, the infrared cameras, the pilot's own eyes, All of them reported the same thing: objects with extraordinary capabilities, operating with impunity in restricted airspace, showing no regard for safety protocols or international norms of aviation. The official response from the Navy was, initially, silence. Then, after the leaked videos began circulating publicly, a carefully worded acknowledgement that the videos were genuine, that the incidents were under investigation, and that the objects remained unidentified. The term unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, became the preferred language, replacing the loaded term UFO in official discussions. But changing the terminology didn't change the underlying reality. The objects were there. They were observed by multiple independent systems. They performed maneuvers that suggested technology far beyond anything publicly acknowledged, and they appeared in areas associated with nuclear weapons, just as their predecessors had appeared over missile silos in Montana and North Dakota decades earlier. The ocean keeps its secrets, but the men and women who operate on and above it know what they've seen. And what they've seen suggests that whatever is observing humanity's nuclear capabilities isn't limited to the land. The same intelligence, if that's what it is, operates over the sea as well, with the same capabilities, the same interest, the same mysterious purpose. Chapter 5. The Soviet Files. Cold War Secrets from the Other Side. For decades, the Iron Curtain separated not just populations and ideologies, but information. What the Americans knew about UFO encounters at their nuclear facilities was classified. What the Soviets knew was even more deeply buried, hidden in KGB archives and military intelligence files that few in the West even knew existed. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, some of those files began to emerge. The picture they painted was remarkably similar to what had been occurring in the United States. Soviet nuclear facilities, weapons production plants, test sites, missile bases had also been visited by unexplained aerial objects. The reports came from military personnel, from scientists, from security forces. The language was different, filtered through Soviet ideology and institutional culture, but the observations were consistent: objects that moved impossibly fast, objects that hovered over sensitive installations, objects that appeared during nuclear weapons tests or near missile launches. And in some cases, just as at Malmstrom, objects that coincided with mysterious malfunctions in missile systems. One particularly well-documented incident occurred in 1982 at a Soviet ICBM base. According to reports that later emerged from Russian military sources, an unidentified object appeared over the base, and multiple missiles went into launch mode spontaneously. Their automated systems somehow triggered without authorization. Only the intervention of personnel on the ground, who manually overrode the launch sequence, prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident, or worse, the start of a nuclear war based on a false perception of attack. The Soviet military took these incidents seriously. Internal documents show that investigations were conducted, that patterns were noted, that concern was expressed at high levels about the implications of unknown objects demonstrating this level of capability over strategic weapon systems. But publicly, the Soviet position was the same as the American position: denial, dismissal, or silence. The most extensive public discussion of Soviet UFO encounters came from Colonel Boris Sokolov, who was involved in military investigations of unexplained phenomena during the 1980s. In interviews after the fall of the Soviet Union, he described a systematic pattern of UFO sightings at nuclear installations, patterns that military intelligence had documented but could not explain. He spoke of objects that interfered with communication systems, that caused temporary power failures, that seemed to be monitoring Soviet nuclear capabilities with the same interest they showed in American capabilities. What emerged from these Soviet files was a picture of a phenomenon that transcended the Cold War divide. Both superpowers, despite their ideological opposition and mutual suspicion, were experiencing the same thing. Their nuclear weapons, the culmination of their scientific achievement and the foundation of their strategic power, were being observed by something that neither side controlled or understood. There's a certain irony in this parallel experience. The Americans and Soviets spent decades preparing to destroy each other, building weapons that could end civilization, maintaining a constant state of readiness for a war that would have no winners, and throughout this period, both sides were being watched by something that demonstrated technological superiority over both of them, something that seemed unimpressed by their weapons or their ideologies, Some researchers have speculated that if the UFO phenomenon is real, and if it involves non-human intelligence, then the Cold War may have looked quite different from the perspective of that intelligence. Not a struggle between titans, but two groups of primates fighting over nuclear fire, observed with the same detached interest that human scientists might show when watching animals in the wild. The Soviet files also revealed something else: attempts at engagement. According to some reports, Soviet military pilots were ordered to intercept UFOs on multiple occasions. These intercepts rarely went well. In several documented cases, the UFOs simply outmaneuvered the Soviet fighters, accelerating away at speeds that made pursuit futile. In a few cases, aircraft suffered equipment failures during intercept attempts, and in at least one tragic case, a pilot was killed when his aircraft malfunctioned during what appeared to be an intercept of a UFO. Whether these incidents represented hostile action by the UFOs, or simply the inherent danger of attempting to intercept objects with far superior technology, remains unclear. But they established a pattern. The objects would not be caught, would not be forced down, would not be controlled. They came and went as they pleased, and human military forces, for all their power and sophistication, could do nothing to stop them. As more Soviet files have been released over the years, the picture has become more complete, though still fragmentary. What's clear is that the phenomenon was global, that it showed the same characteristics on both sides of the Iron Curtain, and that both superpowers were equally unable to explain or control it. The objects appeared over Soviet test sites in Kazakhstan, over American test sites in Nevada. They hovered over missile silos in Montana and in the Urals. They paced Soviet bombers and American bombers alike. If nothing else, the Soviet files established that whatever was happening wasn't an American phenomenon or a Soviet phenomenon. It was a human phenomenon, something that responded to or was interested in the fact that humanity had developed nuclear weapons, regardless of which particular group of humans held them. And in that universality lies a troubling question. What does it mean that our most powerful weapons, the ones we believed gave us dominance over our enemies and security against attack, were being treated as objects of curiosity by something that seemed to regard our borders and our ideologies as irrelevant? Chapter 6. Rendlesham Forest. Lights in the English Woods. December 1980. The Cold War was in one of its frozen phases, tensions high, but no shooting. In England, at RAF Bentwaters and nearby RAF Woodbridge, American Air Force personnel were stationed as part of NATO's defence of Western Europe. The bases housed nuclear weapons, though the official position was always deliberately ambiguous about their presence. Everyone knew, but no one said. The forest of Rendlesham lay between the bases, a quiet stretch of English woodland that would become the site of one of the best documented UFO encounters in history. On the night of December 26th, just after Christmas, security personnel noticed strange lights in the forest beyond the fence line of RAF Woodbridge. At first, they thought it might be a downed aircraft. The lights were unusual, white and blue pulsing in a way that didn't match navigation lights, but crashes happened, and it was their duty to investigate. A security team was dispatched, led by Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman John Burrows. They moved carefully through the forest, following the lights. What they found was not a crashed aircraft. According to Peniston's later testimony and the notes he made at the time, they encountered a structured craft of some kind, triangular in shape, approximately 9 feet long and 6 feet high. It appeared to be metallic, with a dark surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols or markings covered one side, patterns that didn't match any writing system Peniston recognized. The craft was warm to the touch. It pulsed with light, and where the light touched the surrounding vegetation, witnesses later reported unusual effects: broken branches, indentations in the ground, radiation readings that were higher than background levels. Peniston claims he touched the craft, running his hand over its surface, trying to understand what he was seeing. His training as a security specialist gave him no framework for this. It wasn't a Soviet aircraft. It wasn't an American aircraft. It wasn't any kind of aircraft he had ever seen or heard of. Then the craft moved, not like a helicopter lifting off or a plane accelerating down a runway. It simply rose, maneuvering through the trees with impossible delicacy for something solid, and then accelerated away at a speed that left the witnesses stunned. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. vanished into the night sky over the English countryside. The security team returned to base and filed a report. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, was sceptical. He was a career officer, a man who dealt in facts and evidence, and the story his men were telling sounded like something out of science fiction. But his men were credible. They were multiple independent witnesses, and something had clearly happened in that forest. 2 nights later, Holt took a team back into the forest to investigate. What happened during those hours is documented in an audio recording that Holt made on a handheld tape recorder, a piece of evidence that would become one of the most analysed artefacts in UFO research. The recording captures Holt and his team moving through the forest, taking radiation readings, discussing what they're seeing. The radiation levels at the supposed landing site are elevated 2 to 3 times normal background radiation. There are physical impressions in the ground, a triangular pattern of indentations that suggests something heavy sat there, and then, as they're documenting the site, they see lights. On the recording, you can hear the moment it happens. Holt's voice, previously calm and professional, takes on a different quality. He's describing a light in the sky, red and white, moving through the trees. He's trying to maintain his composure, trying to document what he's seeing in clear language. But there's an edge of something in his voice. Not quite fear, but profound disorientation. The reaction of a trained military officer encountering something that doesn't fit his understanding of reality. The light moves closer. It appears to be responding to their presence, pacing them as they move through the forest. Other lights appear in the sky. The tape captures multiple voices now, officers and airmen, all seeing the same thing, all trying to make sense of it. The lights move over the forest, over the base, performing maneuvers that conventional aircraft cannot perform. And then, gradually, they fade away, leaving Holt and his team standing in the forest as dawn begins to break, trying to process what they've just experienced. The official report that Holt filed with the Ministry of Defense was brief and carefully worded. He documented the lights, the radiation readings, the physical traces, but he was cautious in his conclusions. He stated facts, let the evidence speak for itself, didn't speculate about what the objects might have been. But in later years, after his retirement, Holt would speak more freely. He would describe his certainty that what he witnessed was not of human origin, that the technology demonstrated was far beyond anything in the inventory of any nation on Earth. The Rendlesham incident became famous, partly because of the quality of the witnesses, military officers with security clearances, trained observers with nothing to gain from fabricating a story, and partly because of the physical evidence. The radiation readings, the ground traces, the audio recording, the formal report filed through official channels. It was harder to dismiss than a simple lights-in-the-sky report. And there was the nuclear connection. RF Bentwaters and Woodbridge were not just any bases, they were strategic installations in NATO's defence network, and they housed American nuclear weapons. The objects that appeared in Rendlesham Forest did so in the immediate vicinity of those weapons. Whether that was coincidence or intention remains a matter of interpretation, but it fits the pattern established at American and Soviet installations. Nuclear weapons attract attention from whatever these objects are. Over the years, other witnesses from those December nights have come forward. Airmen who saw the lights but didn't file reports at the time, afraid of career repercussions or simply not wanting to be associated with something so strange. Their accounts generally corroborate the main narrative. Something unusual happened in Rendlesham Forest, something that multiple trained observers witnessed, something that left physical evidence behind. The British government's official position has been that the incidents posed no threat to national security, and therefore warranted no further investigation. The Ministry of Defence files on Rendlesham, released years later under Freedom of Information requests, contain the reports and testimony, but draw no conclusions. The case remains open in the sense that no definitive explanation has been offered that satisfies all the evidence. For Lieutenant Colonel Holt and the other witnesses, no official explanation is necessary. They know what they saw, know what they experienced, and they know that something demonstrated an interest in an American nuclear weapons storage facility on English soil, demonstrated capabilities that no known technology could match, and then departed, leaving behind only questions and the memory of lights moving through the winter woods. Chapter 7. Global Patterns. Israel, India, China, and the Worldwide Vigil. The pattern was not limited to the superpowers. As nuclear weapons technology spread, As more nations developed atomic arsenals or nuclear energy programs, the sightings spread with them. In the Middle East, where Israel maintains its careful policy of nuclear ambiguity, reports emerged from the 1960s and 1970s, accounts from retired military personnel describing objects over the Negev desert near Dimona, where the nuclear reactor stands. Glowing spheres tracked by radar, moving at speeds and in patterns that defied conventional aircraft, encounters investigated but never explained. Across the subcontinent, similar phenomena appeared after India conducted its first nuclear test in 1974. Military installations in Rajasthan, near the test sites, reported lights in the sky, objects hovering over sensitive facilities. The Indian Air Force investigated quietly, their official statements cautious, neither confirming nor denying what their personnel had witnessed. And in the East, where China remained the most secretive of the nuclear powers, very little information emerged officially. But accounts from defectors and occasional reports filtering through Chinese media suggested the same pattern: objects over nuclear facilities, unexplained radar tracks, incidents that caused confusion among military commanders but were handled quietly, away from public scrutiny. What's striking about these reports from different nations, different cultures, different military and political systems is their consistency. The objects behave the same way regardless of what country they're appearing in. They show the same capabilities. They demonstrate the same apparent interest in nuclear facilities. The cultural interpretation may vary. Some witnesses frame their experiences in religious terms, others in technological terms. Still others avoid interpretation entirely and simply report what they saw. But the core observations remain remarkably uniform. This worldwide pattern suggests that whatever the phenomenon represents, it is not a product of any one nation's military or intelligence apparatus. The technology involved is too consistent, too advanced, and too widely distributed to be the secret project of any government. The United States cannot explain the sightings over Soviet facilities. The Soviets couldn't explain the sightings over American facilities, and neither superpower can explain the sightings over the facilities of smaller nuclear powers. There's a certain democracy to the phenomenon. It doesn't appear to discriminate based on ideology or power. Communist and capitalist, developed and developing, aligned and non-aligned, all have reported the same experiences. Nuclear weapons, regardless of who possesses them, appear to attract the same attention. Some researchers have compiled databases of these worldwide incidents, attempting to map the pattern in space and time. What emerges is a picture of a global surveillance network, if that's what it is, that has operated continuously since the dawn of the nuclear age. Wherever nuclear weapons are developed, tested, stored or deployed, these objects eventually appear. The time lag can vary. Sometimes sightings begin immediately, sometimes not until facilities are fully operational, but the correlation is too strong to be coincidental. The phenomenon appeared wherever nuclear capability emerged. When Pakistan developed nuclear weapons in the 1980s, incidents near its facilities followed. France, which had been an early nuclear power, maintained military files documenting unexplained objects near its test sites, first in Algeria, later in the Pacific. Even North Korea, the most recent addition to the nuclear club, showed signs of the pattern, though they released no official information. Satellite imagery and accounts from defectors hinted at unusual activity near their nuclear facilities, activity that outside analysts sometimes struggled to explain. The phenomenon appears to scale with human nuclear capability. As the global stockpile of nuclear weapons grew from a handful in 1945 to tens of thousands at the height of the Cold War, the frequency of sightings appeared to increase. As nuclear testing ramped up in the 1950s and 1960s, with hundreds of atmospheric detonations, reports of unusual aerial activity increased in parallel. And the objects didn't just appear during peacetime. During crises, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, various Cold War standoffs, reports of UFO activity near nuclear installations sometimes increased. Whether this represented heightened observation during periods of nuclear tension or simply increased vigilance by military personnel during crisis periods is difficult to determine, but the timing is suggestive. If the phenomenon is real, and if it represents some form of intelligence monitoring humanity's nuclear activities, then the moments when nuclear weapons might actually be used would presumably be of greatest interest to that intelligence. And the report suggests that during those moments, the watchers, if that's what they are, pay closer attention. There's a humbling quality to this global pattern. Humanity split the atom and thought it had achieved ultimate power, the ability to reshape or destroy civilization at will. And then something appeared that demonstrated that this power, which seemed so absolute from a human perspective, was not absolute at all. Something was watching, something with capabilities that made our most advanced weapons seem primitive, something that operated on a global scale with apparent impunity. The nations of the world, for all their differences, share this experience. They have all encountered something that doesn't respect their boundaries, doesn't acknowledge their sovereignty, doesn't fear their weapons. And they have all, in their official capacities, chosen largely to remain silent about it, maintaining public positions that range from skepticism to denial, while their internal military files tell a different story. Why this silence? Fear of public panic, perhaps. Concern about appearing credulous or unserious. The absence of definitive answers, which makes public discussion uncomfortable for governments that are supposed to have answers. Or perhaps a recognition that acknowledging the phenomenon publicly would require acknowledging a loss of control, a vulnerability that nations are reluctant to admit. But the silence doesn't change the underlying reality. The pattern is there, documented in military files around the world, attested to by credible witnesses across decades and continents. Nuclear weapons attract attention from something that we do not control and do not understand, and that something operates globally, treating the Earth as a single system, observing humanity's most dangerous technology without regard for the political divisions we place so much importance on. Chapter 8. Recurring incidents. The symmetry of mystery. If the incidents were isolated, they could be dismissed as anomalies, but they're not isolated. They recur with a regularity that suggests pattern, purpose, or at least sustained interest. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as nuclear arsenals continued to grow and missile technology improved, the incidents at military installations continued. New reports emerged from Malmstrom, from other bases in Montana, from installations in Wyoming, North Dakota, Missouri. The objects appeared, were observed, sometimes interfered with systems, and departed. Investigations were conducted, reports filed, and then quietly archived. Across the American heartland, the pattern repeated itself. At F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, lights appeared over missile fields, objects tracked on radar, security teams dispatched to investigate unusual activity only to find nothing that explained what the sensors had detected. South Dakota's Ellsworth Air Force Base reported the same experiences. Missouri's Whiteman saw identical patterns, the same unexplained lights, the same radar contacts, the same absence of conventional explanation. These were not random sightings of lights in the sky by untrained observers. These were structured encounters at high-security military installations, witnessed by personnel whose job was to distinguish between normal and abnormal activity, documented through multiple sensor systems, investigated by military intelligence. The consistency of the reports, across bases, across years, across different commands and different branches of service, creates a pattern that's difficult to explain through conventional means. And the pattern wasn't limited to land-based missiles. Submarines carrying ballistic missiles, the stealthiest and most secure leg of the nuclear triad, also reported incidents. Though these reports are even more highly classified than the Air Force incidents, accounts from former submarine officers suggest encounters with unidentified submerged objects, USOS in the terminology that emerged, that demonstrated capabilities as far beyond known submarines as the aerial objects were beyond known aircraft. Objects that could move underwater at impossible speeds, objects that could dive to depths that would crush any known vessel, objects that appeared on sonar but couldn't be pursued or identified. The ocean, like the sky, seemed to harbour watchers. The 1990s brought a reduction in Cold War tensions and a corresponding reduction in the nuclear arsenals of the major powers. Thousands of warheads were decommissioned, strategic bombers were retired, missile silos were emptied and sealed, and interestingly, some researchers noted a correlation. As the nuclear threat diminished, the frequency of UFO incidents at military installations appeared to decrease. This correlation, if it's real, and not an artifact of reduced military activity or changed reporting practices, would support the hypothesis that the phenomenon is specifically interested in nuclear weapons. As the threat diminished, the interest diminished. As the weapons were removed, the watchers, if that's what they were, needed to watch less closely. But the incidents didn't stop entirely. They continued, at a lower rate perhaps, but with the same essential characteristics. The pattern remained even as the intensity varied. In the 2000s, a new factor emerged: nuclear terrorism concerns. The possibility of non-state actors acquiring nuclear materials or weapons became a major security focus, and with it came reports of unusual activity at nuclear storage sites, transport routes, and facilities dealing with nuclear material. Whether these incidents represented the same phenomenon expanding its attention to non-military nuclear activities or simply reflected increased security vigilance around nuclear materials is difficult to determine. But the pattern was consistent with what had come before. Where nuclear materials went, unusual activity sometimes followed. One particularly interesting case emerged from Russia in the 2000s, when a former officer came forward with testimony about an incident at a nuclear storage facility in the early 1990s. According to his account, an object appeared over the facility, multiple weapon systems attempted to track it, and none succeeded. The object moved with such speed and agility that targeting was impossible. It performed a series of maneuvers directly over the storage area, as if inspecting the contents, and then departed. The officer's account was specific, detailed, and consistent with other reports from both Russian and Western facilities. He described the confusion among personnel, the frustration of being unable to respond effectively, and the ultimate decision to classify the incident and avoid official discussion. His motives for coming forward were unclear: no financial benefit, no apparent agenda beyond a desire to see the truth discussed openly. These recurring incidents spread across decades and continents create a picture of sustained monitoring. Not random encounters, not brief periods of interest, but a long-term pattern of observation that has continued from the beginning of the nuclear age to the present. Whatever is behind the phenomenon, if it represents a unified intelligence rather than multiple unrelated causes, it has demonstrated remarkable persistence and patience. From a human perspective, this long-term pattern is perhaps more unsettling than any single dramatic incident. We can explain away a single sighting as misidentification, equipment malfunction, or hoax. But explaining away decades of consistent reports from military professionals around the world, all describing the same basic phenomenon, requires either a massive conspiracy of fabrication or an acceptance that something real and unexplained has been interacting with humanity's nuclear infrastructure. The symmetry of the phenomenon is striking. The same types of objects performing the same types of maneuvers, showing the same apparent interest, appearing in the same contexts, nuclear facilities, regardless of time or place. This symmetry suggests either a single cause operating globally or multiple causes that are somehow coordinated or following the same pattern. If these are craft of some kind, piloted by some form of intelligence, then that intelligence has maintained a watching brief over human nuclear activities for 80 years. That's several human generations. It's the entire nuclear age. It's an investment of attention and resources that suggests the matter is of significant importance to whoever or whatever is doing the watching. And in all that time, despite numerous intercept attempts, despite sophisticated radar and satellite coverage, despite the full efforts of multiple major military powers, not a single one of these objects has been caught, forced down, or definitively identified. They come and go as they please, operating with a freedom that suggests either technological superiority so great that our efforts at interception are irrelevant, or some quality, dimension of operation and mode of existence, that places them outside our ability to control. Chapter 9. Official Investigations. From Blue Book to ATIP. For the military and intelligence services tasked with investigating these incidents, the challenge was profound. How do you investigate something that defies conventional explanation? How do you analyze data that doesn't fit your models? How do you report findings that your superiors may not want to hear? Project Blue Book, the Air Force's public investigation program, operated from 1952 to 1969. In that time, it collected over 12,000 reports of UFO sightings. The vast majority were explained as misidentifications, natural phenomena, or hoaxes. But a core of cases remained unexplained, officially termed unknowns in Blue Book's terminology. These were cases where the witnesses were credible, The evidence was solid and no conventional explanation fit the facts. Many of the cases involving nuclear facilities fell into this unknown category. The Malmstrom incidents, the Minot encounter, numerous other reports from missile bases and bomber stations. Blue Book investigated them, documented them, and in most cases concluded that they defied conventional explanation. But the official stance remained skeptical. The concluding report from Blue Book, issued when the project was terminated in 1969, stated that UFOs represented no threat to national security and no evidence of extraterrestrial technology. This conclusion struck many of the investigators who had worked on the project as political rather than analytical. They had seen the cases, they knew which ones defied explanation, and they knew that the official conclusion didn't match the evidence in the files. After Blue Book ended, official UFO investigation supposedly ended with it, but documents that emerged in later years suggested that this was not entirely true. Various military and intelligence agencies continued to collect and analyze UFO reports. They just did so quietly, without public programs or official acknowledgement. The Navy's encounters in 2004 and 2015 sparked renewed official interest. The 2004 Nimitz incident, where FA-18 pilots from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz encountered a tic-tac-shaped object off the coast of California, was particularly compelling. The object demonstrated capabilities that the pilots described as not of this world. Instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic speeds without sonic booms, maneuvering that ignored the limits of physics as understood by aeronautical engineers. That incident, and the Roosevelt encounters that followed, led to the creation of ITIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. This was a Pentagon program, officially confirmed in 2017, that investigated military encounters with unexplained aerial phenomena. The program was small, relatively low budget, but it represented an official acknowledgement that the military was taking these incidents seriously. Lou Elizondo, who ran ITIP before leaving government service, became a public advocate for serious investigation of the UFO phenomenon. He testified to the existence of credible incidents that the government had no explanation for. He described technologies observed in military encounters that were far beyond known human capabilities. And he stated his belief, based on the evidence he had seen, that the phenomenon represented something real, something physical, and something that operated with capabilities that suggested either revolutionary human technology or non-human origin. In 2020, the Pentagon officially released 3 Navy videos showing encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. The videos, which had been circulating unofficially for years, showed objects performing maneuvers that naval aviators stated were beyond the capability of any known aircraft. The official release was accompanied by a statement confirming that the videos were authentic, that the objects in them were unidentified, and that the incidents remained under investigation. This official acknowledgement represented a significant shift. For decades, the government position had been dismissive or silent on UFOs. Now, senior Pentagon officials were admitting on record that there were objects in American airspace that the military could not identify, could not explain, and could not control. Congress took notice. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment on UAPs in 2021. The report was brief and carefully worded, but it acknowledged 144 incidents involving military encounters with unexplained objects. Of these, the report could explain only 1. The rest remained unknown. The report noted that the objects demonstrated capabilities that suggested advanced technology, that they represented a flight safety issue and potentially a national security concern, and that further investigation was warranted. The report was significant for what it didn't say as much as for what it did. It didn't dismiss the incidents as misidentifications. It didn't claim to have explanations that satisfied the evidence. It acknowledged the reality of the phenomenon and the limits of current understanding. The following year, NASA announced it would conduct its own scientific study of UAPs, bringing civilian scientific resources to bear on a question that had previously been largely confined to military and intelligence channels. The announcement was framed carefully. This was to be a study using rigorous scientific methods, not a confirmation of any particular explanation, but it represented another step toward mainstream acceptance that the phenomenon warranted serious investigation. By 2023, Congress held hearings that included testimony from military witnesses describing encounters with unexplained objects, including incidents near nuclear facilities. The testimony was careful, focused on what witnesses had observed rather than speculation about causes, but it put on public record what had previously been confined to classified reports. Military personnel, operating advanced sensor systems, were regularly encountering objects that outperformed known aircraft and defied conventional explanation. What these official investigations and acknowledgements represent is a slow shift from denial to admission. The government position has moved from nothing is there to something is there but we don't know what it is. This shift didn't happen because of public pressure alone. It happened because the evidence accumulated to the point where denial became untenable, at least within the classified world where military personnel were filing reports and seeking guidance on how to respond to these encounters. The officials who have spoken publicly about these programs, Elizondo, Christopher Mellon and others, have been careful to emphasize that they're not claiming to know what the phenomenon is. They're saying that it's real, that it demonstrates capabilities beyond known technology, and that it deserves serious scientific and national security attention. They've pushed back against both the believers who want them to confirm extraterrestrial origin and the skeptics who want them to dismiss the entire phenomenon. What's clear from the official investigations is that the military and intelligence services take the phenomenon seriously in private, even if the public stance has been more cautious. The incidents are documented, they're analysed. Officers who report them are not, in most cases, dismissed as credulous or unreliable. The reports go up the chain of command and into classified databases where patterns can be analysed. And one of the clearest patterns in those databases, according to those who have seen them, is the correlation with nuclear facilities. The phenomenon appears more frequently in proximity to nuclear weapons, nuclear power plants, nuclear research facilities. Whether this represents causation or correlation, intention or coincidence, remains unknown. But the pattern is there, documented across decades, noticed by analysts, and unexplained by conventional theories. The creation of ARROW, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, in 2022 represented the latest evolution in official investigation. This office, based in the Pentagon and reporting to senior leadership, has the mandate to collect and analyse reports of unexplained phenomena from all branches of the military and from civilian sources. It represents an acknowledgement that the phenomenon, whatever it is, requires ongoing attention and investigation. The office's early reports have been cautious, emphasising that most reported incidents turn out to have conventional explanations once properly investigated. But they also acknowledge that some percentage of reports remain unexplained even after thorough analysis, and they note that the reporting is increasing, whether because of genuine increases in activity, or simply because personnel are now more willing to file reports without fear of ridicule. What the official investigations have not done, at least not publicly, is provide a definitive explanation. They have not said, these are foreign drones, or these are natural phenomena, or these are misidentifications. For the core of credible incidents, particularly those involving nuclear facilities and those witnessed by trained military personnel with sensor data to back up their observations, the official position remains unknown. And perhaps that's the most honest position possible given the state of the evidence. The phenomenon is real in the sense that people are experiencing something, that sensors are detecting something, that incidents are occurring that require explanation. But what the something is remains, after 80 years of reports and decades of official investigation, a mystery. The shift from official denial to official acknowledgement of that mystery is significant. It opens the door to serious scientific investigation, to better data collection, to analysis that's not constrained by the need to dismiss or explain away every incident to fit preconceived notions, and it allows the question to be asked openly. What are these objects? Why do they appear near nuclear facilities? And what, if anything, should humanity do about them? Chapter 10. Witnesses in Uniform. The Human Element. Behind every report, every incident, every documented encounter, there are people. Men and women in uniform who saw something that challenged their understanding of reality, who filed reports knowing they might be met with skepticism, who in many cases kept silent for years before finally speaking publicly about their experiences. These witnesses share certain characteristics. They were, almost without exception, trained observers, military personnel, pilots, radar operators, security forces, people whose job was to distinguish between normal and abnormal, to recognize threats, to maintain vigilance. They were not, in most cases, people predisposed to believe in UFOs or alien visitation. They were professionals doing their jobs, who encountered something that their training and experience could not explain. Captain Robert Salas from the Malmstrom incident in 1967 spent decades debating whether to come forward publicly with his story. In his own account, he worried about credibility, about being labelled as someone who believed in little green men, about damaging his reputation. But he also felt a responsibility to tell the truth about what he had witnessed. His missiles had gone offline while objects were reported in the sky above them. That was a fact documented in official records, and he believed that fact deserved to be part of the public record, whatever the cost to his personal comfort. When he finally did come forward, he found that he was not alone. Other officers from Malmstrom contacted him, men who had their own stories, their own experiences with unexplained incidents at the base. Some were willing to speak publicly, others only privately, but they corroborated the basic narrative. Something had been happening at Malmstrom, something the Air Force had documented but not explained. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt from the Rendlesham Forest incident faced similar challenges. He was a senior officer, a man with a distinguished career, and his testimony about what happened in those woods in England was specific, detailed, and supported by physical evidence. But he also knew that coming forward publicly would invite scrutiny and skepticism. In interviews after his retirement, Holt described the experience of being confronted with something that didn't fit his worldview. He was a pragmatic man, a military officer who dealt with practical realities. Unexplained lights in the forest, radiation readings, craft touching down among the trees, these things were not part of his reality framework. But he had experienced them, along with multiple other witnesses. His audio tape documented his reactions in real time. The evidence was there. What troubled Holt, and what troubles many of the military witnesses who have come forward, is not just the phenomenon itself, but the official response to it. The tendency to dismiss, to explain away, to avoid serious investigation. Holt and his men filed official reports through proper channels. They expected investigation, analysis, perhaps classified briefings on what they had encountered. Instead, they got silence, or in some cases suggestions that they had misidentified conventional phenomena. This response pattern, witnesses filing credible reports, those reports being quietly filed away without resolution, appears consistently across the decades of military UFO incidents. It creates a culture of non-reporting, where personnel who encounter something unexplained often choose not to file reports because they don't believe anything will come of it, or worse, because they fear career repercussions. Commander David Fravor, the Navy pilot who encountered the tic-tac-shaped object during the 2004 Nimitz incident, had a similar experience. He was a senior pilot, a squadron commander, someone with thousands of hours of flight time and a reputation for professionalism. When he encountered an object that violated the known physics of flight, that accelerated in ways that would kill any human pilot due to G-forces, that demonstrated technology far beyond anything in his experience, he reported it through official channels. The response was initially muted. His report was taken, the sensor data was collected, and then, not much. No briefing on what he had encountered, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had happened, paired with an implicit message that discussing it further was not encouraged. It wasn't until years later, after the video of the encounter leaked to the public and the incident became part of wider UFO discussions, that Fravor felt comfortable speaking about it openly. And even then, he was careful in his language. He described what he saw, what his sensors recorded, what his training told him was impossible. He avoided speculation about origin or purpose. He simply stated the facts of the encounter and let others draw their own conclusions. Lieutenant Ryan Graves from the Roosevelt encounters described a different kind of challenge. His squadron encountered these objects regularly, sometimes daily, over a period of months. For him and his fellow pilots, these weren't one-time anomalies. They were a persistent presence in their training areas, a safety hazard that they had to work around, an unexplained factor in their operations. Graves tried to report up the chain of command. He filed reports, raised concerns, sought guidance on how to respond to objects that appeared to be operating freely in military training areas. The response, according to his testimony, was bureaucratic inertia. No one denied that the objects were there. The sensor data was too clear, the number of witnesses too large, but no one seemed to know what to do about them, and so nothing much was done. This pattern of institutional non-response is one of the most puzzling aspects of the military UFO phenomenon. These witnesses were not fringe figures. They were active duty personnel, many of them with top-secret clearances and positions of responsibility. They were reporting incidents that, if they represented foreign technology, would constitute a massive security breach. If they represented something else, unknown natural phenomena or non-human technology, that would also seem to warrant serious investigation. Yet the institutional response was often to simply document the incident and move on. No urgent investigations, no public statements, no apparent effort to solve the mystery or develop responses to these intrusions into restricted airspace. The witnesses who have come forward publicly represent a fraction of those who have had experiences. For every officer who has spoken on the record, there are likely dozens who have chosen to remain silent. Some because they signed non-disclosure agreements, or hold clearances that restrict what they can discuss. Others because they don't want the attention or the controversy. Still others because they're not sure anyone would believe them, or because they're not sure they believe themselves. The human cost of these encounters can be significant. Multiple witnesses have described psychological impacts, the difficulty of reconciling what they experienced with their understanding of reality, the isolation of knowing something that most people dismiss as impossible, the frustration of having expertise and credibility, but being unable to get authorities to take the matter seriously. Some witnesses have described being told explicitly not to discuss their experiences, orders to keep silent, warnings about classification, suggestions that talking about what they saw would be bad for their careers. Whether these directives came from formal security protocols or informal pressure to avoid embarrassment, the effect was the same: silence, for years or decades, about incidents that might have significant implications for understanding the phenomenon. When the culture of silence began to break in the 2010s and 2020s, with more witnesses coming forward and official acknowledgement of the phenomenon increasing, it created a kind of relief for many who had been carrying these experiences alone. They discovered that they were not unique, that their observations were part of a larger pattern, that they were not crazy or mistaken. The testimony of these witnesses, taken as a whole, paints a picture of dedicated professionals encountering something that challenged their reality, doing their best to document and report what they experienced, and often facing institutional indifference or dismissal in response. They're credible, they're consistent with each other across decades and locations, and they have generally nothing to gain and potentially much to lose by coming forward. Their stories are the human face of the phenomenon. Behind the data and the documents and the official reports, there are people who saw things that frightened or awed them, who questioned their own perceptions, who ultimately had to live with the knowledge that something exists that we don't understand, something that operates with impunity near humanity's most dangerous weapons. And perhaps that's the most important thing these witnesses offer. Not proof of any particular explanation, but testimony to the reality of the experience. Something happened. They saw it. They reported it. And the fact that we still don't have satisfactory explanations decades later says something about the limits of our current understanding, about the complexity of the phenomenon, or about the reluctance of institutions to grapple with questions that don't have comfortable answers. The witnesses ask only to be taken seriously, to have their reports investigated with the same rigour that would be applied to any other security matter, to have the evidence considered on its merits rather than dismissed because it doesn't fit preconceived notions of what is possible. That seems like a reasonable request, and the fact that it has taken decades for that request to receive official acknowledgement suggests something about the difficulty humans have in confronting the unknown, especially when the unknown appears in our most secure facilities and defies our understanding of technology and physics. Chapter 11. Modern Incursions. Bringing the pattern into the present. The pattern has not ended. As nuclear facilities continue to operate, as new weapons systems are developed, as nuclear power plants generate electricity around the world, reports of unexplained activity continue. Hanford Site in Washington state, once a production facility for weapons plutonium and now a massive environmental cleanup project, has reported multiple incidents in recent decades. Security personnel describe objects over the restricted areas, lights that move in patterns inconsistent with aircraft or drones. The incidents are documented, investigated by site security and federal agencies, and remain in most cases unexplained. Nuclear power plants, which share some of the technology and materials of weapons programs, while serving civilian purposes, have also been sites of unexplained activity. Reports from plants in the United States, Europe, and Asia describe objects hovering over reactor buildings or spent fuel storage areas. The pattern matches what has been seen at weapons facilities: objects that appear interested in nuclear materials, that demonstrate capabilities beyond conventional technology, that observe and then depart. A particularly notable incident occurred at the Indian Point nuclear power plant in New York in the early 2000s. Security guards reported a large triangular object hovering silently over the facility for several minutes before departing at high speed. The incident was investigated by the NRC and other agencies, but no conclusive explanation was offered. The security personnel involved were experienced professionals who were certain of what they had seen. The Fukushima disaster in Japan in 2011, while primarily a story of natural disaster and technological failure, also included reports of unexplained aerial activity. In the chaotic days after the tsunami, when the nuclear plant was in crisis and radiation levels were spiking, multiple witnesses reported seeing objects over the facility. These reports were overshadowed by the magnitude of the disaster and have received little official investigation, but they fit the pattern: nuclear crisis, followed by unexplained aerial activity. Whether these objects represented some attempt at observation during a nuclear emergency, or whether they were conventional drones or aircraft misidentified in the stress of the disaster, remains unclear. But the reports exist, from witnesses who had little reason to fabricate stories during such a critical situation. Recent years have seen an increase in reports of drone-like objects near nuclear facilities. These reports raise the question of whether the modern phenomenon is simply unauthorized civilian drones, a much more prosaic explanation than the structured craft of earlier reports. Security experts certainly take the drone threat seriously. Small commercial drones could potentially be used for surveillance or even to deliver hazardous materials, but some of the reports don't fit the civilian drone profile: objects that fly for hours without landing, suggesting power sources beyond battery technology; objects that operate in adverse weather conditions; objects that move at speeds or in patterns that strain the capabilities of known drone technology; and objects that, when security attempts to track them, demonstrate capabilities that suggest something more advanced than civilian equipment. The challenge with modern reports is distinguishing between different types of phenomena: civilian drones, military test aircraft, foreign surveillance systems, and whatever the historical UFO phenomenon represents might all be appearing in the same airspace, making analysis more complex. What was relatively straightforward in the 1960s, any object performing beyond known capabilities was anomalous, is less clear in an era of rapidly advancing drone and aircraft technology. AARO, the Pentagon's current investigative office, is tasked with sorting through these modern reports. Their early assessments suggest that many recent incidents are explainable as civilian drones, balloons, or misidentified conventional aircraft. But they also acknowledge that some cases remain truly anomalous, demonstrating capabilities that are not readily explained by reference to known technology. Interestingly, the geographic pattern of reports has shifted somewhat in recent years. While North America and Europe still see incidents, there has been an increase in reports from Asia, particularly China and Japan. This could reflect genuine increases in activity in those regions, or it could reflect increased reporting as awareness of the phenomenon grows and the stigma around reporting decreases. China's rapid expansion of nuclear power infrastructure, with dozens of new reactors built in recent decades, has been accompanied by occasional reports of unexplained activity near those facilities. The Chinese government has released little official information, maintaining its characteristic secrecy around security matters, but accounts from workers and unofficial sources hint at incidents similar to those reported elsewhere. One aspect of modern reports that troubles security analysts is persistence. At some facilities, unexplained activity is not a one-time incident, but an ongoing pattern. Objects appear regularly, sometimes on predictable schedules, suggesting surveillance or monitoring rather than random encounters. This pattern of sustained observation is particularly concerning if the objects represent foreign intelligence gathering, and particularly puzzling if they represent something else. The technology visible in modern encounters continues to outpace known capabilities. Reports describe objects that transition from air to water seamlessly, objects that appear to manipulate their environment in ways that suggest directed energy or field effects, objects that seem to be aware of and reactive to human observation. These characteristics match reports from decades past, suggesting either a continuity of phenomenon or a consistency of misperception, and given the quality of modern sensors and witnesses, the latter seems increasingly unlikely to explain all cases. Military pilots in recent years have described encounters where objects seem to anticipate their movements, almost as if the objects know what the pilots are going to do before they do it. This apparent awareness or predictive capability, if real, suggests intelligence and sophistication that goes beyond simply advanced propulsion or stealth technology. Some encounters include electronic effects, instruments that behave erratically, communication systems that experience interference, electronics that fail, and then resume normal function after the object departs. These effects were reported in earlier encounters as well, but modern electronics should be more resistant to random electromagnetic interference, suggesting that whatever is causing the effects is more sophisticated than simple radiofrequency radiation. The modern phenomenon, whatever it represents, appears to be adapting to human technological advancement, or perhaps more accurately, remaining just ahead of human capability. In the 1960s, the objects outperformed jets and missiles. In the 2020s, they outperformed stealth aircraft and hypersonic systems. The performance gap remains roughly constant, always advanced enough to be beyond current human capability, never so far beyond as to seem like magic. This characteristic of remaining at the edge of possible but not quite achievable is interesting. It's consistent with advanced human technology being tested in secret. It's also consistent with non-human technology that is deliberately modulating its displayed capabilities to remain just beyond human reach. Without knowing the source, distinguishing between these possibilities is difficult. What's clear is that the phenomenon, whatever its nature, has not ended. It continues into the modern era, showing the same patterns of behavior, the same apparent interest in nuclear facilities, the same capabilities that defy conventional explanation. The 75-plus years of reports are not just historical curiosities. They're part of a continuing pattern, one that may be increasing in frequency or visibility as both human technology and willingness to report improve. And as with the historical cases, the modern incidents raise the same fundamental questions. What are these objects? What is their purpose? Why do they appear near nuclear facilities? And what, if anything, should humanity do about them? The fact that these questions remain unanswered after 3/4 of a century suggests that easy answers don't exist. Whatever the phenomenon represents, it is either very good at avoiding definitive identification, or it represents something sufficiently outside our current framework that we lack the tools or concepts to properly analyze it. Chapter 12. Intentions and Deterrence. The meaning behind the mystery. What are we to make of this pattern? 75 years of reports, hundreds or thousands of incidents, multiple nations, consistent observations, and still no definitive answers. The accumulated evidence suggests that something real is happening, but defining that something remains elusive. If we accept the reports at face value, if we assume that credible witnesses are accurately reporting their experiences, that sensor data is being properly interpreted, that investigations have been conducted in good faith, then we're left with a phenomenon that demonstrates certain consistent characteristics. The correlation with nuclear facilities is too strong, too consistent to be coincidental. Whatever these objects are, they appear where nuclear weapons or nuclear materials are present, with a frequency that suggests intention rather than random distribution. They demonstrate technological capability far beyond acknowledged human technology. The speeds, the maneuvers, the apparent disregard for physics as we understand it, suggest either revolutionary secret technology or non-human origin. And yet, despite thousands of encounters over decades, despite intrusions into restricted airspace, despite approaching military personnel and aircraft, the phenomenon has shown no hostility. Not in any documented case has it launched an attack or caused intentional harm. The missile shutdowns at Malmstrom could be seen as aggressive acts, but they could also be interpreted as demonstrations or tests conducted without escalation or follow-through. Most telling, perhaps, is the apparent awareness and intelligence the objects display. They respond to human activity, they avoid or evade pursuit, they seem to observe with purpose. This is not random natural phenomena. This is something acting with intention. Given these characteristics, several interpretive frameworks are possible. the most prosaic explanation would be advanced human technology, perhaps a black program, secret even from most of the military and intelligence services, testing advanced craft near nuclear facilities for some strategic purpose. This explanation has the advantage of keeping everything within known reality. Humans have the knowledge and capability to build advanced aircraft, even if the performance described seems beyond current public technology. But this explanation faces significant challenges. The phenomenon has been consistent since the 1940s, which would require a secret program of remarkable longevity and resource commitment. The sightings occur globally, including over Soviet and Russian facilities, which would require either cooperation between rivals or capabilities that strain belief. And the technology gap, the difference between what these objects can do and what publicly acknowledged technology can do, would have to have remained constant for decades, which seems unlikely if this represents a single advancing program. Foreign technology offers another framework. Perhaps these are Chinese or Russian surveillance systems, advanced drones, or aircraft spying on American nuclear facilities and those of other nations. This would explain the intelligence-gathering character of the encounters and would fit within known great power competition dynamics. But this explanation also has problems. The encounters began in the 1940s, when neither the Soviet Union nor any other nation had the technology to build craft with these capabilities. The incidents occur over Russian facilities as well as American ones, which would be odd if this were Russian technology. And the performance characteristics remain beyond what any nation is publicly acknowledged to possess, requiring either massive technological breakthroughs that have been kept entirely secret, or a willingness to believe that China or Russia are centuries ahead of the rest of the world in aerospace technology. Then there is the framework that has dominated popular discussion but has been largely avoided in official circles: non-human intelligence. The objects would be craft built by a civilization not of Earth, perhaps extraterrestrial, perhaps from some other source entirely, observing humanity's nuclear activities either out of scientific interest, concern, or for reasons we cannot fathom. This explanation fits the observed facts in many ways. The technology gap would make sense if the builders had centuries or millennia more development time. The global pattern would be expected if this were external observation. The long duration of the phenomenon could represent a single extended observation period from a civilization that doesn't measure time in human decades. But this explanation requires accepting something for which we have no definitive proof: that non-human intelligence exists, that it has the capability for interstellar or interdimensional travel, and that it has chosen to observe humanity in this particular, persistent way. There is also a framework less commonly discussed but worth considering: that the phenomenon represents something else entirely. Not craft at all, but perhaps some natural phenomena that we don't yet understand, something about the intersection of nuclear reactions and atmospheric or quantum effects that creates observable phenomena with apparent structure and intelligence. This would be an entirely new physics, something outside current models, but it would explain why the phenomenon appears near nuclear facilities without requiring visitors from elsewhere. This framework has the advantage of not requiring acceptance of extraterrestrial intelligence while still acknowledging that something real is happening. But it struggles to explain the apparently intelligent behavior of the objects, their ability to avoid pursuit, their response to human activity. Natural phenomena, even novel ones, typically don't demonstrate the kind of awareness and intentionality that witnesses describe. Perhaps the truth is that we're trying to force the phenomenon into human categories that don't quite fit. We think in terms of craft and pilots, technology and origin, because those are the frameworks we have. But maybe the phenomenon is something our current concepts can't adequately capture, something that will require new ways of thinking to properly understand. What's clear is that none of the conventional explanations fully satisfy the evidence. Each has elements that fit and elements that don't. The phenomenon remains genuinely anomalous, in the sense that no current framework completely explains it. The question of intentions is perhaps the most fascinating and the most frustrating. If these objects are intelligently controlled, what do their controllers want? Why this sustained interest in nuclear weapons? Why observation without contact? Why demonstrations of capability without aggression? Perhaps the phenomenon represents guardianship, concern about humanity's development of weapons capable of destroying civilization or rendering Earth uninhabitable. The nuclear age marked a threshold. the first time a species on Earth developed the capacity for its own extinction. Perhaps that threshold attracts attention from watchers concerned about nuclear war's implications, either for humanity or for some larger community we're unaware of. This interpretation fits the non-hostile nature of the encounters and the focus on nuclear facilities. It suggests warnings or monitoring rather than threat. But it requires believing that some intelligence cares about humanity's survival, which is a comforting but unproven assumption. Or perhaps humanity is being studied, and the nuclear age represents an interesting developmental stage worth monitoring. Just as human scientists might pay special attention to a group of primates that has discovered fire, perhaps some intelligence finds humanity's nuclear capability notable enough to observe closely. This interpretation treats humanity as objects of study rather than partners in communication, which may be uncomfortable but fits the pattern of observation without contact. It explains the sustained interest without requiring that the observers particularly care about humanity's welfare. We're interesting, so we're watched. There is also the matter of resource interest to consider. Nuclear facilities concentrate radioactive materials and generate nuclear reactions. Perhaps these materials or processes are valuable or interesting to the observers for practical rather than ethical or scientific reasons. This could explain the focus on facilities while not requiring any particular concern for humanity itself. Or perhaps there is no single intention, no unified purpose. Maybe different incidents represent different sources with different goals. Maybe some are foreign drones, some are secret military tests, and some are genuinely anomalous phenomena of different types. The unified pattern we perceive might be an artifact of trying to force disparate phenomena into a single framework. What's interesting about the phenomenon, from a strategic perspective, is what it suggests about deterrence. The entire structure of nuclear strategy rests on the assumption that nuclear weapons are the ultimate power, that possession of these weapons guarantees security against existential threats. Mutually assured destruction kept the Cold War cold because both sides believed their nuclear arsenals made them invulnerable to conquest. But if the UFO phenomenon is real, if something with vastly superior technology has been observing and occasionally interfering with nuclear weapons for 75 years, then that assumption of ultimate power is called into question. Nuclear weapons may be the most powerful thing in the human arsenal, but they're apparently not the most powerful thing in the airspace over nuclear facilities. This doesn't mean nuclear deterrence has failed. It still works perfectly well among human powers. But it does suggest a humbling truth. Humanity's ultimate weapons may not be particularly impressive to whatever shares our skies, and that puts our conflicts, our security anxieties, our arms races in a different perspective. If advanced intelligence is watching us, what do they see? Sophisticated beings managing dangerous but necessary technology? Or children playing with matches, requiring occasional supervision to ensure we don't burn down the house? We don't know, can't know without contact or communication, but the question itself is worth contemplating. The phenomenon's restraint, if it represents intelligence, is perhaps its most reassuring characteristic. Despite thousands of opportunities over 75 years, despite intrusions that would have justified defensive responses, despite encounters that must have put military personnel on edge, there has been no attack, no aggression beyond the ambiguous missile shutdowns at Malmstrom. If the phenomenon meant harm, it has had ample opportunity to demonstrate it. This restraint suggests either benign intent, strict rules of engagement that prohibit harm, or indifference that doesn't extend to active interference. Any of these would be preferable to hostility. But not knowing which is true leaves humanity in a state of strategic uncertainty, aware of being observed by something powerful, but unsure of what that observation means or what rules govern the relationship. In the end, the phenomenon leaves us with questions that don't have comfortable answers. What it represents, why it appears, what it wants or needs or observes, all remain unknown. What we know is that something has been present throughout the nuclear age, watching as humanity unlocked atomic power, observing as we built weapons capable of destroying our civilization, monitoring our most sensitive facilities with capabilities we cannot match. That presence, whatever it is, represents either the greatest mystery of the modern age or a collection of more prosaic phenomena that happen to cluster around nuclear facilities for reasons we haven't yet identified. Either way, it deserves serious investigation, clear thinking, and honest acknowledgement of the limits of current understanding. The witnesses have done their part, reporting what they've seen with the credibility their training and experience affords them. The investigators have done what they can, documenting incidents and analysing evidence within institutional constraints. The files exist, the patterns are there, the questions remain open. Perhaps someday we'll have answers. Perhaps the phenomenon will make itself more clearly known, or perhaps human technology will advance to the point where we can properly analyse what's happening. Perhaps the truth is already known in classified programs, waiting for the right time for disclosure. Or perhaps the mystery will persist generation after generation, a reminder that for all our technological advancement and scientific achievement, we share our world with something we don't fully understand. Something that appears in the night sky over our most dangerous machines, observes with patient persistence and then departs, leaving behind only questions and the memory of encounters that challenge our certainty about our place in the universe. Closing. The silence between stars. The desert is quiet tonight. The same desert where it all began, where the first atomic fire bloomed in the darkness before dawn. The silos stand cold and waiting, monuments to human ingenuity and human fear, housing weapons that could end our story in an afternoon. Above them the stars turn in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns, and sometimes, perhaps, something else moves among those stars, something that has watched us since we first split the atom, observing as we learned to build bombs and missiles and submarines, monitoring as we came to the edge of our own extinction and stepped back, again and again. We don't know what those watchers are, if watchers they be. We don't know why they appear when they do, what they learn from their observations, whether they care about our survival, or simply find us interesting in the way we might find a complex organism under a microscope interesting. What we know is that we've seen them. Thousands of witnesses, decades of reports, patterns too consistent to dismiss. Military personnel with everything to lose and nothing to gain from fabrication have told their stories, filed their reports, maintained their testimony even in the face of skepticism and silence. Something has been present throughout the nuclear age, something with capabilities that humble our achievements, something that treats our borders and our weapons as navigational suggestions rather than barriers, something that operates with an assurance that suggests it knows we cannot stop it, cannot catch it, cannot do anything but watch and wonder. In the quiet of the desert night, under skies that have seen both atomic fire and stranger lights, we're left with questions. Questions about who we are, what we've become, what we share our world with. Questions about power and limitation, about the difference between what we think we control and what actually controls our fate. The nuclear facilities stand under their lights, humming with carefully managed power. The weapons wait in their silos, ready for a launch that may never come. The sailors patrol in submarines beneath the waves. The airmen fly their patterns over continents and oceans. And sometimes they see something that doesn't belong in their carefully ordered world. Something that reminds them that order is local, that control is provisional, that the universe holds more than our equations and our strategies account for. For 75 years we've been dancing this dance. Nuclear weapons and unknown observers, human power and something beyond it, questions asked into silence, and silence that provides no answers. The phenomenon persists, the reports continue, the mystery endures. Perhaps that's how it will remain, a presence in our skies that we cannot fully explain, cannot control, cannot do anything about except acknowledge and wonder at. A reminder that we are not alone in finding nuclear weapons interesting, that we are observed by something we don't understand, that our most powerful technology may look quite different from an outside perspective. The men and women who guard the nuclear facilities go about their duties. They monitor their instruments, patrol their perimeters, maintain their vigilance, and sometimes, rarely but repeatedly, they see something that shouldn't be there. A light in the sky, an object on radar, something that moves wrong, hovers wrong, accelerates wrong. They report it. It gets documented, investigated, and often filed away without resolution. And life continues. The weapons remain under guard, the missiles stay ready, and the sky holds its secrets close. In the end, what we're left with is the mystery itself, not solved, not explained, but present. Real in the sense that people experience something, that sensors detect something, that incidents occur that require explanation even if explanation remains elusive. The phenomenon is part of our history now, woven into the story of the nuclear age. It's in the military files and the witness testimonies, in the sensor data and the photographs, in the investigations that reached no conclusions, and the reports that documented events beyond current understanding. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps living with mystery is part of what it means to be human, to exist in a universe that's larger and stranger than our models and theories encompass. We built weapons that could end the world, and something noticed, something watched, something demonstrated that our ultimate power is not quite as ultimate as we thought. That knowledge, uncertain as it is, unproven as it remains, might be the phenomenon's greatest gift, a reminder of proportion, a suggestion of humility, a hint that we should be careful with our dangerous toys because we're not the only ones paying attention. The desert is quiet, the stars turn, the weapons wait, and somewhere in the darkness, perhaps, the watchers continue their vigil, whatever they are, wherever they're from, whatever they see when they look at us, small and fierce and dangerous, tending our atomic fires in the desert night. The mystery continues, the questions remain, and in the silence between stars we wait for answers that may never come, or may come in ways we cannot yet imagine. Sleep now, let the questions drift. The watchers, if they exist, will keep their vigil while you rest, and tomorrow the sun will rise over the desert, over the bases, over the oceans and continents, over a world that holds more mysteries than we've yet solved. For now, rest. The story is told, the unknown remains unknown, and that perhaps is as it should be.